London in the swinging 70s was not just about rock and roll and miniskirts. Behind the glitz of the West End and the flashing bulbs of the paparazzi, a darker game was being played. We all know the stories of young actresses exploited by powerful producers, but there is another side to this coin. A side whispered about in smoke-filled private clubs and dressing rooms. This is the story of the young, handsome men who traded their youth for a place in the spotlight. They were the golden boys of British cinema, but their tickets to fame were often paid for by the lonely, wealthy, and powerful women who loved them. From violent quarrels to broken hearts, these are the secret histories of the men who climbed the ladder of success, one bedroom at a time. Subscribe and comment if you want to know the price of fame. Roger Moore. Before he raised an eyebrow as James Bond or charmed audiences as the Saint, Roger Moore was a struggling knitwear model with a face carved by angels but pockets that were completely empty. In the early 1950s, he was just another pretty boy hoping for a break in an industry that chewed up young men and spat them out. That was until he met Dorothy Squires. At that time, Squires was one of the richest and most famous singers in Britain, a woman who could sell out the London Palladium and whose voice ruled the airwaves. She was also 13 years his senior, a fiery Welsh woman with a temper as powerful as her lungs. To the public, it looked like a romance, but to the cynics in the industry, it looked like a business transaction. Dorothy did not just offer him love, she offered him a lifestyle. She bought him his first silk suits, paid for his dental work to give him that perfect Hollywood smile, and most importantly, she introduced him to the people who mattered. Their life in a grand mansion in Kent seemed idyllic, but behind the closed doors, it was a war zone. Dorothy was possessively jealous, terrified that her young, handsome trophy would leave her for a younger model. And she was right to be worried. The arguments were legendary. In one terrifying incident during a heated clash, Dorothy allegedly picked up a guitar and smashed it over Roger Moore's head. On another occasion, she threw a brick through a window when he locked her out. But Roger stayed. He stayed while his career slowly began to tick upward, fueled by her connections and her relentless pushing of his name to producers. She was the engine behind his rise, the woman who fought for his auditions when no one else would look twice at a model trying to act. But gratitude in show business has a very short shelf life. By the 1960s, Roger Moore had become a television star with The Saint. He had the fame, the money, and the adoration of millions of women. He no longer needed the volatile singer who had paid his dues. When he met Luisa Mattioli, a stunning Italian actress, the writing was on the wall. The separation was brutal. Dorothy did not go quietly. She sued him for loss of conjugal rights, a humiliating and archaic legal move that dragged their private life into the tabloids. She even smashed the windows of the home he shared with his new love, cutting her arms in the process. When the police arrived, she famously told them that it was not her arm that was bleeding, but her heart. Roger Moore went on to become a global icon as 007, the epitome of the British gentleman. But those who knew the truth of his early years knew that the tuxedo was paid for by the tears and the fortune of the woman he left behind. Lawrence Harvey. If there was ever a man who treated his romantic life like a strategic military campaign, it was Lawrence Harvey. Born in Lithuania and desperate to shed his immigrant roots, Harvey reinvented himself as the ultimate English gentleman. But beneath the polished accent and the tailored suits lay a cold, ambitious heart that would stop at nothing to conquer Hollywood. In the early 1950s, Harvey was a struggling actor, living in a small flat, barely making ends meet. He realized very quickly that talent was not enough. He needed a patron. He found one in Hermione Baddeley. Baddeley was a respected character actress, a star of the stage, and crucially, she was 22 years older than him. She was not the glamorous starlet of his dreams. She was often described by the press as blousy and eccentric, but she had the keys to the kingdom. Harvey moved into her home, allowing her to keep him. It was a scandal in the conservative society of 1950s London. He was the young, beautiful boy, and she was the aging matron desperate for affection. But for Harvey, this was not about affection. It was about access. Through Baddeley, he met the casting directors, the agents, and the critics who could make or break a career. He used her status to elevate his own, attending premieres on her arm and charming her influential friends. But Harvey was not just a passive recipient of her generosity, he was notoriously cruel. Associates from that time whispered that he would mock her behind her back, making fun of her age and her appearance, even as he ate her food and lived in her house. He was biding his time, waiting for the moment when he would be big enough to stand alone. That moment came with the film Room at the Top, a title that ironically mirrored his own life. As soon as he achieved critical acclaim and an Oscar nomination, the use of Hermione Baddeley came to an end. He discarded her with a ruthlessness that shocked their mutual friends. But Harvey was not done with older, powerful women. He immediately set his sights on Margaret Leighton, another older, highly unstable actress. He married her, and their relationship was a toxic mix of drama and public fights. Yet even she was just a stepping stone. His ultimate prize was Joan Cohn, the widow of the legendary Hollywood mogul Harry Cohn. She was 17 years his senior and incredibly wealthy. By marrying her, he cemented his place in the Hollywood elite. Lawrence Harvey died young, at the age of 45, but in his short life, he proved that for some men, the wedding ring is the most powerful weapon in their arsenal. John Bindon. In the polished world of British cinema during the 1970s, most actors were trained in prestigious drama schools, speaking with glass-cut accents and wearing velvet jackets. John Bindon was the terrifying exception. He was not an actor by trade, he was a violent man from the London underworld who stumbled onto a film set. With his jagged nose, scars, and an aura of genuine danger, he offered a thrill that no trained thespian could fake. But his acting salary was never enough to sustain the high life he craved. Bindon discovered very early on that his true currency was his raw, aggressive masculinity. He became the ultimate bit of rough for the bored, aristocratic women of Chelsea and Kensington. These wealthy heiresses and aging socialites were tired of polite conversation. They wanted danger, and Bindon provided it in spades, provided they picked up the check at the end of the night. His most significant patroness was Vicky Hodge, the daughter of a baronet and a successful model. She was the epitome of high society, yet she fell completely under the spell of the Fulham Hardman. Their relationship was a bizarre collision of two worlds. Hodge provided the luxury flat, the expensive holidays, and the entry into circles that would normally have arrested a man like Bindon on sight. He lived off her generosity, treating her home like his personal headquarters for drinking and chaotic behavior. In return, she got the excitement of living on the edge, parading her dangerous lover in front of shocked friends like a wild trophy. But this was just a warm-up for his most audacious conquest. Through his connections with the upper class, he found himself on the private island of Mustique, mingling with royalty. It was there, under the Caribbean sun, that the most scandalous chapter of his life allegedly took place. Bindon was introduced to Princess Margaret, the sister of the Queen. At that time, the princess was lonely, her marriage was crumbling, and she was known for enjoying the company of younger, entertaining men. Bindon, with his Cockney rhyming slang and lack of deference, amused her. Rumors swirled for decades about their private lunches and the nature of their friendship. While the palace would never confirm such things, witnesses from that era spoke of a closeness that went beyond protocol. For a brief moment, the gangster from Fulham was effectively the court jester to the royal family, enjoying the finest wines and the most exclusive company, all because he knew exactly how to charm a powerful woman who needed a distraction from her royal duties. However, the life of a kept man is precarious. When the novelty wears off, or when the danger becomes too real, the doors are slammed shut. For Bindon, the end came with violence. In 1978, he was involved in a vicious knife fight outside a pub in Fulham. Although he was acquitted of murder, the scandal was too much even for his thrill-seeking patrons. The aristocracy closed ranks. Vicky Hodge eventually moved on, and the invitations to Mustique stopped arriving. The man who had charmed his way into the beds and bank accounts of the elite found himself alone. He died in obscurity, a relic of a time when society ladies thought it was fashionable to play with fire, leaving behind only the tabloid stories of a man who punched his way up and was eventually kicked back down. George Sanders. If there was ever a man who turned being a cad into a high art form, it was George Sanders. With a voice that sounded like expensive velvet dipped in poison, he was the ultimate upper-class villain of the silver screen. But while he played the cynical, heartless bounder in films like All About Eve, his real life was a far more tragic performance of a man who was terrified of being ordinary. By the dawn of the 1970s, the golden age of Hollywood was crumbling, and so was Sanders. He had always relied on his impeccable charm and his ability to seduce wealthy, glamorous women to maintain the lifestyle to which he felt entitled. He was not just looking for love, he was looking for a caretaker, someone to cushion him from the harsh realities of a world that was becoming too loud and too vulgar for his refined tastes. His romantic history was a roadmap of strategic alliances, most notably his bizarre entanglement with the Gabor dynasty. He famously married Zsa Gabor, the Hungarian beauty who was more famous for being famous than for any acting talent. Their marriage was a tempest of flying porcelain and sharp words, a public spectacle that kept Sanders in the headlines even as his film roles began to shrink. He became the accessory to her dazzling celebrity, a role he played with a sneer of sophisticated detachment. But the true depth of his desperation became clear in 1970, when, in a move that shocked even the most hardened gossip columnists, he married Zsa's older sister, Magda Gabor. It was a scene straight out of a dark farce. At this point, Sanders was a shadow of his former self. He was ailing, depressed, and reportedly suffering from the early stages of dementia. The marriage to Magda was seen by many as a final, frantic attempt to secure a safe harbor, a return to the fold of a wealthy family that could look after him. It was a transaction of comfort, not passion. The union was a disaster, lasting only 32 days. The humiliation was total. The man who had once been the epitome of suave control was now reduced to a punchline, passed between sisters like an unwanted heirloom. He had spent a lifetime cultivating an air of superior boredom, famously stating that he was content to simply exist beautifully. But without the youth, the health, or the wealthy patroness to fund that existence, the boredom turned into a suffocating darkness. The end for George Sanders was as scripted as any of his movies, but far more chilling. In April of 1972, he checked into a hotel near Barcelona. He was 65 years old, alone, and tired of the struggle to maintain the facade. He did not die of a broken heart, but of a broken spirit. He left behind a note that has become part of Hollywood folklore, stating simply that he was leaving because he was bored and he felt he had lived enough. It was the ultimate act of a man who had treated life like a cocktail party that had gone on too long. He had charmed his way into the highest circles, married into money, and played the game better than anyone. But in the cold light of a Spanish hotel room, no amount of charm could save him from the emptiness of his own reflection. His story remains a stark warning that while you can marry for money and status, you cannot negotiate with time. Oliver Tobias. In the late 1970s, Britain was suffering from economic gloom, strikes, and power cuts. But in the cinema, the temperature was rising thanks to one man. Oliver Tobias did not just walk onto the screen, he prowled. With his brooding dark eyes, wild hair, and a physique that seemed carved from granite, he became the instant obsession of millions. But his rise to stardom was not the result of a long apprenticeship in the theater or years of playing minor roles in television dramas. His rocket to fame was ignited by the most glamorous and powerful woman in show business at the time, the legendary Joan Collins. The film was The Stud, a title that left absolutely nothing to the imagination. It was a film based on a scandalous book written by Joan's sister, Jackie Collins, and it was a project entirely designed to resurrect Joan's career. But to make it work, she needed a co-star who could embody the ultimate male fantasy, a man who could be both dangerous and submissive. She found Oliver Tobias. At the time, Tobias was a relatively unknown actor, a Swiss-born performer trying to find his footing in the competitive jungle of London. He had talent, certainly, but in the eyes of the producers, his primary asset was his raw, animalistic magnetism. The casting process was less about acting ability and more about chemistry. The role required him to play a waiter who uses his charm to climb the social ladder, servicing the needs of a wealthy, older woman who owns the nightclub where he works. It was a case of art imitating life in the most cynical way possible. The press went into a frenzy. The tabloids, always hungry for a scandal, immediately began to speculate that the intense, steam-filled scenes between Tobias and Collins were not just acting. They painted a picture of a young man who had been handpicked by an older, powerful doyenne to be her on-screen plaything, a living prop to showcase her own enduring allure. For Tobias, the role was a double-edged sword of the sharpest kind. On one hand, it made him an overnight sensation. He was the pin-up on every teenager's wall and the secret crush of every housewife in Britain. He was earning money he could only have dreamed of a few years prior, but the price was his dignity as a serious artist. He was paraded around premieres and parties like a prize stallion. Interviews focused entirely on his physique and his romantic life, ignoring his training and his other work. He had become the stud in the eyes of the public, a label that is incredibly difficult to peel off. The industry began to treat him not as an actor, but as a commodity, a piece of exotic fruit to be consumed and then discarded when the flavor ran out. The dynamic between him and the Collins dynasty was fascinating. While Joan was the undisputed queen, pulling the strings and controlling the narrative, Tobias was the young pretender, riding in her wake. There were whispers of friction on set, of a young man tired of being treated as merely the love interest in a woman's world. He reportedly struggled with the objectification, famously stating in later years that he felt like a piece of meat. While other actors of his generation were building careers on gritty realism or Shakespearean roles, Tobias was trapped in the gilded cage of the toy boy image. He had gained the world, but he had lost control of his own identity. His story serves as a reminder that in the ruthless game of show business, becoming a sex symbol is often a deal with the devil, where the currency is your soul and the receipt is a label you can never quite wash off. Ian McShane. By the late 1970s, the British film industry was producing a specific breed of leading man. They were not the polite gentlemen of the past. They were rough, rugged, and dangerous. At the forefront of this new wave was Ian McShane, a man with eyes as dark as coal and a reputation to match. While he is known today as a respected elder statesman of cinema, back in the disco decade, he was the definition of a wild card. But his most significant role was not in a film script. It was in the life of Sylvia Crystal. At that time, Crystal was arguably the most desired woman on the planet. As the star of the Emmanuelle films, she was the queen of European erotic cinema, a woman who symbolized ultimate liberation and fantasy. She was wealthy, world-famous, and incredibly vulnerable. When she met McShane on the set of The Fifth Musketeer in 1976, the chemistry was not just explosive, it was nuclear. For a struggling actor trying to break out of the confines of British television, being associated with Sylvia Crystal was a ticket to the international high table. Suddenly, McShane was not just a working actor, he was one half of the most glamorous and volatile couple in Europe. They were the Burton and Taylor of the underground, sweeping through the finest hotels in Paris and Los Angeles like a hurricane. But the dynamic was heavily skewed. Crystal was the one with the global box office draw, the one whom producers wanted to wine and dine. McShane entered her world, a world of unlimited excess and very few rules. To the outside observer, he was the dashing lover protecting the fragile beauty. But the tabloids of the time painted a much darker picture, suggesting that he was the catalyst for a descent into chaos that would eventually derail her career. Their relationship was fueled by what polite society calls chemical assistance. It was a romance lived in the twilight hours of nightclubs and the artificial light of film sets. Friends of Crystal whispered that the British actor was too intense, too dominating, and that he absorbed her light to shine brighter himself. Stories circulated about violent arguments that wrecked hotel suites, of jealousy that bordered on obsession. Yet, they stayed together. For 5 turbulent years, McShane lived in the eye of the storm. He was the man on the arm of the woman every other man wanted. It raised his profile immensely. Being Mr. Sylvia Crystal opened doors in Hollywood that might otherwise have remained closed to a television actor from Blackburn. He was seen, he was photographed, and he was talked about. In the currency of show business, notoriety is just as valuable as talent, and McShane had it in abundance. However, the crash was inevitable. The lifestyle they led was unsustainable, both financially and emotionally. As Crystal's star began to wane, weighed down by typecasting and personal struggles, the relationship disintegrated. When they finally separated, the narrative was brutal. She was left picking up the pieces of a shattered career and a broken heart, while he eventually moved on to America to reinvent himself. Looking back, their time together serves as a grim lesson in the power dynamics of fame. It was a classic case of a moth being drawn to a flame, but in this instance, it was unclear who was the moth and who was the fire. McShane survived the wreckage to become a legend. Crystal was not so lucky. It stands as a testament to the fact that, in the 70s, the most dangerous role an actor could play was the lover of a woman who had too much to lose. David Hemmings. By the time the calendar flipped to 1970, David Hemmings was already a legend, but a legend that was starting to fray around the edges. He was the poster boy of the swinging 60s, the face that defined a generation in Michelangelo Antonioni's blow-up. With his angelic blonde hair and those piercing, arrogant eyes, he looked like a choir boy who had just stolen the communion wine. But the 70s were a different beast. The optimism of the previous decade was turning into a hangover, and Hemmings was feeling the headache more than most. He was a man of immense talent, but also of immense chaos. He needed an anchor, a patron, someone who could tame the whirlwind. He found his savior not in a producer's office, but in the form of Gail Hunnicutt, a woman who was everything he was not. Gail Hunnicutt was American royalty in the sense of Hollywood glamour. She was a Texan beauty, poised, elegant, and dripping with the kind of sophisticated class that Hemmings, the boy from Guilford, could only dream of. When they met, the dynamic was instantly set. She was the calm, wealthy, and stable force. He was the volatile artist. To the public, they were the Posh and Becks of the 1970s, the golden couple who ruled the British social scene. They moved into a magnificent Georgian mansion, a sprawling estate that became the headquarters for the most hedonistic parties of the era. It was a lifestyle funded by their combined star power, but insiders knew that it was Gail's presence that kept the creditors and the demons at bay. She gave him a legitimacy that his bad boy image could not sustain on its own. For nearly 7 years, Hemmings lived the life of a country squire, a role he played with relish. He wore the tweed suits, drove the fast cars, and played the lord of the manor. But beneath the surface of this idyllic domesticity, the old habits were festering. Hemmings was a man who struggled to accept peace. The Alphonse dynamic here was psychological as much as it was financial. He fed off her stability to fuel his own creativity, but he resented the leash. He was notorious for his wandering eye. While Gail was the perfect hostess, maintaining their image and raising their child, David was out living the life of a single man. The tabloids were full of whispers about his late nights and meetings that had nothing to do with film scripts. He treated her devotion as a renewable resource, something that would never run out, no matter how much he abused it. The betrayal was not just romantic, it was a betrayal of the sanctuary she had built for him. He brought chaos into her ordered world. There are stories from that time of wild arguments that echoed through the halls of their grand estate, of a man fighting against the very woman who was keeping him upright. He was biting the hand that fed him, both emotionally and socially. When the marriage finally collapsed in 1975, the effect on Hemmings was catastrophic. Without his anchor, he drifted. The golden boy of the 60s began to look like a relic. While he continued to work and direct, the aura of invincibility was gone. He had ridden the wave of her grace for as long as he could, but when the wave broke, he was left alone on the shore. His story is a poignant reminder that in the world of celebrity, having a beautiful, powerful partner can get you to the top, but it takes more than just charm to stay there. Michael Caine. It may seem like heresy to include the man who is now the grandfather of British cinema on a list of men who used romance as a ladder, but the Michael Caine of the 1960s and 70s was a very different animal from the lovable old sage we know today. Before he was Alfie, and long before he was Alfred the Butler, Maurice Micklewhite was a man with a chip on his shoulder the size of the elephant in Castle. He was working class, he was broke, and he was desperate. He knew that in the rigid class system of Britain, talent was secondary to who you knew, and, more importantly, who you were sleeping with. In the early days of his struggle, Caine was not above leaning on the women in his life for support. He was a lodger in the hearts and homes of women who could offer him a warm bed and a hot meal when the acting jobs were scarce. His most pivotal early relationship was with Patricia Haynes, an actress who was, at the time, more established than he was. They married young, and the dynamic was fraught with the tension of financial instability. Kane was the struggling husband, the man who could not provide while she worked in repertory theater to keep the lights on. It was a humiliation that burned deep. The marriage collapsed under the weight of his ambition and his frustration. Kane famously walked out, leaving her and their infant child behind, a move he later described as the act of a young, selfish man terrified of failure. He admitted in candid moments that he had to choose between his family and his survival as an actor, and he chose the actor. It was a cold, calculated decision that haunted him for decades. But the real Alphonse moment came later as his star began to rise. He became the ultimate symbol of the swinging bachelor, a role he played to perfection both on and off screen. He dated a string of high-profile, glamorous women, from Bianca Jagger to models and socialites. Each relationship served a purpose. Each one kept his name in the bold print of the newspapers. He was seen at the right restaurants, wearing the right glasses, with the right woman on his arm. He cultivated an image of the accessible superstar, the Cockney boy made good who was essentially available to the highest bidder in the social market. He moved through the elite circles of London and Hollywood, charming the wives of producers and the daughters of tycoons. He was the man everyone wanted at their dinner party, and he knew exactly how to monetize that desire. The pinnacle of this journey was his marriage to Shakira Baksh. While it became one of the most enduring marriages in showbiz, its beginning fits the pattern of a man who pursued what he saw as the ultimate prize. He saw her in a television commercial, a former Miss Guyana, exotic, beautiful, and unattainable, and he hunted her down. It was the crowning achievement of his ascent. He had gone from the boy who borrowed money from his first wife to the international superstar who could pluck a beauty queen from a screen and make her his own. Michael Caine's story is not one of malice, but of a ruthless, singular focus. He used the affection of women as fuel for his engine, burning through relationships until he reached the altitude where he could finally fly on his own. He is the ultimate example of the man who faked it until he made it, and who let the women in his life pay the toll on the road to glory. Roddy Llewellyn. While most of the men on this list were actors using romance to get into the movies, Roddy Llewellyn was a man who used romance to become a character in the greatest soap opera of all, The Life of the British Royal Family. In the mid-1970s, the monarchy was a rigid, impenetrable institution, but Llewellyn was the cracks in the palace walls. He was not a star in the traditional sense. He was a landscape gardener with soft features, a gentle manner, and an ambition that far exceeded his horticultural talents. He wanted to be a pop star, a celebrity, a face that people recognized. And he found the ultimate shortcut to fame in the form of Princess Margaret, the Queen's younger, rebellious, and deeply unhappy sister. Their meeting at the Café Royal in Edinburgh in 1973 was the spark that would eventually burn down the facade of royal privacy. He was 25 years old, she was 43. To the press, he was the toy boy, a term that practically entered the national lexicon because of him. The relationship was a scandal of seismic proportions. For a young man with dreams of stardom, being the lover of a princess was a double-edged sword. On one hand, it gave him the platform he so desperately craved. Suddenly, Roddy Llewellyn was not just a gardener, he was a household name. He was photographed on the private island of Mustique, looking bronzed and carefree in Union Jack swimming trunks while the British economy back home was collapsing. He used this newfound notoriety to launch a singing career, releasing an album simply titled Roddy. The industry insiders rolled their eyes, seeing it for exactly what it was, a vanity project funded by his proximity to the throne. But Llewellyn did not care. He was living the life of a superstar without having done the hard work to earn it. He was the ultimate Alphonse of the era, a man whose entire public identity was defined by the woman he was sleeping with. However, the pressure of such a public imbalance is crushing. The media portrayed him as a lightweight, a hanger-on who was taking advantage of a vulnerable woman. Every review of his music was tainted by the context of his love life. He was not judged on his voice, but on his audacity. And for Margaret, the cost was even higher. The publication of photographs showing them together in the Caribbean was the final nail in the coffin of her marriage to Lord Snowdon. Llewellyn had inadvertently caused a constitutional crisis. He was the catalyst for the first royal divorce since Henry VIII, a distinction that no amount of pop records could overshadow. The public loved the gossip, but they loathed the man at the center of it. He was seen as a symptom of a moral decline, a symbol of a decade where duty was being replaced by pleasure. When the relationship inevitably cooled after 8 turbulent years, the reality check for Llewellyn was harsh. The invitations dried up. The press moved on to the next scandal. He had flown as high as it was possible to fly, touching the very sun of the British establishment, but his wings were made of wax. He eventually retreated back to the world of gardening, finding solace in the soil rather than the spotlight. His story is perhaps the most definitive toy boy tale of the 1970s. He proved that while a powerful woman can open every door in the world for you, she cannot make you talented, and she cannot make the public respect you. He remains a footnote in royal history, remembered not for his songs or his charm, but as the young man who briefly stole the heart of a princess and paid for it with his reputation. Timothy Dalton. Before he donned the tuxedo and the Walther PPK as the most serious James Bond of the franchise, Timothy Dalton was the brooding, dark-eyed Heathcliff of the British stage. He possessed a raw, intense beauty that made him the object of desire for women all over the country. But in the early 1970s, his career was defined not by the roles he played on screen, but by the role he played in the life of the most formidable woman in the British theatre dynasty, Vanessa Redgrave. When they met on the set of the film Mary, Queen of Scots in 1971, the power dynamic was instantly clear. Redgrave was not just an actress, she was a force of nature, an Oscar winner, a radical political activist, and a member of the acting aristocracy. She was 6 years his senior, but in terms of status and influence, she was light years ahead. Dalton, a young Welsh actor with a burning ambition, stepped into her orbit and was immediately consumed by her gravity. Their relationship became one of the most talked-about sagas of the decade. To the tabloids, it was a fascinating collision of the establishment and the rebel. Dalton moved into her world, a world that was as much about revolutionary politics as it was about cinema. Vanessa was notorious for her extreme left-wing views, often standing on street corners selling socialist newspapers. And standing right there beside her, often looking like a reluctant bodyguard, was the incredibly handsome Timothy Dalton. The press had a field day. They painted him as the beautiful accessory to her political crusade, the +1 who was dragged along to rallies and protests. For a man who took his craft seriously, it was a subtle form of humiliation. He was referred to in gossip columns as Mr. Redgrave, a label that stripped him of his own identity and reduced him to the status of a consort to the Queen of Acting. The Alphonse element here was psychological. While Dalton was working, he was undeniably living in the shadow of a woman who cast a very long silhouette. The industry perception was that his proximity to Redgrave gave him a gravitas he had not yet earned on his own. Being with her meant he was taken seriously by directors who might otherwise have dismissed him as just another pretty face. He had access to the elite dinner parties, the private discussions, and the inner sanctum of the British cultural elite, all because he was holding Vanessa's hand. It was a golden cage. He was safe, he was comfortable, and he was connected, but he was not free. The relationship was reportedly volatile, fueled by their intense personalities and the pressure of living their lives in the glare of the flashbulbs. They were the it couple of the intelligentsia, but insiders whispered that Dalton was growing tired of being the second fiddle in the Redgrave orchestra. The breaking point was inevitable. A man with the kind of simmering intensity that Dalton possessed could not remain a supporting player forever. The relationship lasted for nearly 15 years, an eternity in show business, but it was a period where his own star was constantly eclipsed by hers. When they finally parted ways in the mid-80s, it was the moment Dalton finally stepped into his own light. Almost immediately, he was cast as James Bond, achieving a level of global superstardom that even Vanessa could not claim. It was the ultimate vindication. He had served his time as the prince consort, learning the ropes and surviving the storms of a high-profile romance, only to emerge as the king. His story is the final proof that for some men, the path to the top involves walking a long, hard road in the shadow of a powerful woman, waiting for the precise moment to step out and claim the spotlight for themselves.